Okay. Here we are tonight to study Purim, the Feast of Lots, and you all have your handouts. Everybody got one. The backdrop, as I've already told you, the seventh feast of the Lord. You'll notice that Purim is not on that one because it's not one of the biblically commanded feasts, but it is biblical because it's based on the book of Esther. And in the book of Esther, it says that God's people will always remember this feast. Does anybody know anything much about it? Of course, you know it's the book of Esther. Any revelation that you get while we're talking about this, throw it out to me because I want to know. The feasts that are getting ready to start are the spring feast, and what I want to do is have a separate teaching in a couple of weeks before we get to Passover, which is so exciting. I want to have a separate teaching where we do an overview of all of these and we find out why is it important that we study. I had people years ago when I began to feel a calling of the Lord, and I emphasize that, a calling of the Lord to study these. I had some people come to me and warn me, don't do that, stay away from that. You're not a Jew, stay away from that Jewish stuff. But God was telling me to do it, and I knew it. And the reason that it's really, really important for us to study these is because these are prophetic. Some have been fulfilled, some are yet to be fulfilled. Remember how the Apostle Paul talked about types and shadows? These were types and shadows of what was to come. The spring feasts as a whole have been fulfilled, although there's still some stuff we can learn from them for our use now and for the future. So Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of First Fruits, and the Feast of Pentecost. Those are the spring feasts, and they have basically been fulfilled already in Jesus Christ, His work on the cross, the outpouring of the Holy Ghost in the upper room. The fall feast, those are exciting too. Can't wait till we get to those. Feast of Trumpets, Day of Atonement, Feast of Tabernacles. Those are yet to be fulfilled. And we can use those too to grow in our walk with Jesus Christ. And that's what we're going to talk about. But first of all, Purim. And did you know that was how to pronounce this? Or did you do like me all my life? I thought it was like Purim, or I didn't know how to say it. What'd you call it, Carol?
Purim.
Purim. That sounds good, Purim. Is that
Stokes County talk?
But you had the "im" right. It's Purim.
Oh, is it?
Purim.
Purim.
Ooh, you're good.
Yeah, the I is only goes into French.
That's why I said it like I do French. Which is not Hebrew. That's
Yeah, and Purim. And in Hebrew, because this is a Hebrew word, the "im," when you put "im" at the end of a word in Hebrew, it makes it plural. So the word "pur" is technically in the book of Esther, and you can see at the top of your handout, I actually put one scripture on the page. Why is it called Purim? Wherefore they called these days Purim after the name of Pur. And there it is, Esther 9:26. Because the word Pur in Hebrew means lot, and that's spelled P-U-R for the sake of the camera. It means lot, as in you're, rolling a dice, you're casting lots. That's what this was about. So when you make it plural, Purim, it means lots. Does anybody know how that fits into the story? Remember in the book of Esther what happened? How were lots involved? Anybody know?
In Esther?
The book of Esther. Remember how lots were involved? Had to do with the way... Yes.
I'm trying to think. I know, but I can't.
Yeah, the bad guy.
Yeah, Haman. How do you pronounce his name?
For Johanna's sake, well, I like to make it a story for my kids. Haman, the bad guy, said, I'm going to kill the Jews, and we'll get into all that, why he said he was going to do it, but he was going to kill the Jews. And it was like, well, which day should I do it? Which month should I do it? Remember that?
Yeah.
So he cast lots, and it came up that they were going to be killed in the 12th month of the Jewish calendar, which was their final month unless it was a leap year. And their calendar is totally different from ours. So they were going to kill the Jews on the 13th day of Adar, which was the 12th Jewish month. Does anybody know what today is on the Jewish calendar? The 13th day of Adar. Isn't that cool? Today is the day. Because Purim technically starts tomorrow night at sunset. The Jewish calendar is a little bit different from ours. Their day starts at sunset. So tomorrow will be the 14th of Adar at sunset. But today is the 13th of Adar. When the sun went down, that's when it began. So this was the day that the Jews were supposed to be killed. But we know that God delivered. He came in with a mighty deliverance, and we're going to talk about that. So on the 14th of Adar, they celebrate Purim. They also celebrate on the 15th in Jerusalem. There's a reason for that, which we'll talk about. But they celebrate the great deliverance that He brought forth. And it's a joyful holiday. They give gifts. They eat wonderful food. They party, which is not a good thing. We're not going to get drunk, but for the sake of YouTube. But there was a part in the Talmud, you know, when you're reading the Jewish writings, some of the rabbis said that on Purim you're supposed to get so drunk that you don't know if you're saying blessed be Mordecai or cursed be Haman. I don't subscribe to that belief, so we're going to be very sober when we celebrate. So let's talk even more about it. You'll notice that on my handout I like to ask questions. Why is it called Purim? We've talked about that. It was also known as the Feast of Esther. The next question, when is Purim? We know it's the last feast of the Jewish year before we start the spring feast, held on Adar the 14th, which is usually late February or early March. It can even go up to about maybe March the 20th if I'm correct. So it's in the middle this time. Now, if the Jewish calendar needs a leap year, and they don't throw it in every 4 years like we do. It varies. It might be 2 years, 3 years, but when they throw in a leap year, then you move Purim, let's get it right, Purim to the second Adar. They tack on the 13th month, and they call it the second Adar. It would be like us tacking on a second December, December 2. That's what they do. So, that is when they hold Purim. It is celebrated in Jerusalem and other walled cities, the way I told you, on Adar the 15th. The reason for that is when they actually were supposed to be killed. They had to rise up and fight so that they wouldn't be killed, so that they wouldn't be just slaughtered. And the Jewish people won through a mighty deliverance of God. But in the capital city, which was a walled city, they had to fight a little bit longer. They had to fight an extra day. So they had to continue fighting through the 14th of Adar, then they could celebrate on the 15th. For that reason, in Jerusalem, even now, they celebrate Purim on the 15th of Adar. So, the cool thing for us is, I was really sort of bummed out when I realized we couldn't get the library tomorrow night, because at sunset is when it's the 14th of Adar. But we can get it on Thursday night. They're only open late Tuesdays and Thursdays. But it's cool, because we'll be celebrating just as they are in Jerusalem. It's still going to be a very merry night for anybody that can come. We're going to actually celebrate that night.
I wonder why, though, it was the walled city. You know?
I'm not positive of this, but in the Persian capital of Shushan, which is where it actually all took place, that was the big city and it was walled. That's where they had to fight an extra day. So because of that, they said when we take it to Israel and celebrate the walled cities, we'll celebrate a day later. Does that make sense?
In a way.
Simply because that was the walled city in Persia, the big capital city. And there's probably a different explanation, so hopefully somebody will comment on this YouTube video. Tell us we were wrong. All right. Now, the interesting thing with this is the Feast of the Lord that we've got on the board here were commanded in Leviticus 23 long, long ago, in the days of Moses. Purim didn't come about until quite a bit later. So it was added to the Jewish calendar, but at this point, it's one of the biggest ones that they celebrate. Hanukkah's become a big one too, but Hanukkah's also, if you notice, Hanukkah's not up here. That was something that was added, but it also has some biblical significance. Not as much as Purim, because we have an entire book of the Bible about this feast. All right, look at your next question. What is the history behind Purim? I want you to go back in your heads. Think about your Bible history. If you don't know this history, we'll give you a crash course right now. We're all the way back to the 5th century BC. So we're talking about before Jesus was actually manifest on the earth. A lot of the Jews had been taken captive to Persia. You know that happened time and time again. Somebody come and rip all the Jews out of Israel and take them away. Well, at this point they were in Persia. Well, an interesting thing happened. They were suddenly free to go back to their land, but a lot of them said, no, we're happy here. We've been settled here. We have good positions in the Persian government. We're going to stay here. And that's what happened to Esther and Mordecai, who was her cousin, some say her uncle. They said, we choose to stay here rather than go back to Israel, because the rebuilding in Israel was going to be hard, hard labor. It had been just devastated. So a lot of the Jews stayed in Persia. So the setting for Purim is Persia at this time, in the 5th century. A lot of the people had become what we call assimilated. Notice the name Esther. Does that remind you of any holiday on our American calendar? Easter. That's exactly right. Do you know what goddess that comes from? Anybody?
I'm sorry, say again.
What goddess does that come from? The word Esther?
Sun. Wasn't the sun.
No.
The fertility
Yes,
god.
the fertility goddess, her name was Ishtar.
Ishtar.
See how that sounds? Easter, Ishtar, Esther. So, you know, we might look at that and say, I can't believe that. She took on the habits of the pagan. She lived in a pagan land, but she still kept her Jewishness. Before we condemn her because she took on a pagan name, she had the name of the fertility goddess, for goodness sakes. Her uncle Mordecai, or cousin, we're not sure what he was exactly, he had a pagan name as well, from a god like Marduk. He had a pagan name also. Now, does anybody know? I might have put it on here. Yeah, I did. Look at Esther's Jewish name. Look a little farther down the first page. See, her name was the word for the myrtle tree, which was a beautiful tree. The name Hadassah. So, a lot of the Jews will not refer to Esther as Esther. And I don't blame them. They want to use the language that her name was true, the way she was given her name. Hadassah, beautiful myrtle tree.
Same as Daniel and the three friends.
Exactly.
And we grew up learning a bit Meshach. Well, I can't remember them all now.
Shadrach,
Meshach and Abednego.
yeah.
But that's not really their names.
No. And isn't it interesting that Daniel, we know him by his Hebrew name.
Exactly. So we know him, but we know the other three. I guess because it made more fun. It was more fun to say them.
It was good for the songs we sang.
Yeah.
Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, you know, like the same as Azariah, whatever their other name was. But for Esther, we will refer to her tonight as Esther rather than Hadassah, no offense. Now, Esther was an orphan girl. You know her story, most of you, beautiful story. An orphan girl in a foreign land. She was raised by Mordecai. Here we have put that was her cousin. She was chosen as queen, and the story for how she was chosen as queen was a really interesting one. And you can see that I have the main characters. If you can look at Purim as I don't want to say a play, but sometimes the Jews at this time of year actually acted out. You know, we might say, well, there's Queen Vashti, here's Queen Esther, there's King Ahasuerus. You know, they acted out because you do have characters and there's a sinister plot, and then the hero steps in. It's a beautiful, beautiful story. Who are the main players in this story? King Ahasuerus. Does anybody pronounce his name a different way? Carol's shaking her head. I don't know. We'll say King Ahasuerus, and that may not be correct. He was also known as Xerxes the First. And you see his reign there from 486 to 465 BC. Now, he already had a queen. Before Esther came along, his queen, Vashti, we call it in America. That actually is a name that people used to name their kids like 100 years ago, believe it or not. But it was probably something like Vashti. But she was supposedly so beautiful. And he had thrown this huge banquet. And again, I'm making this quick as far as the book of Esther. Y'all go read it this week. It'd be great. He threw this huge banquet, and they say by the end of the banquet that all his nobles, everybody gathered around him was just totally snockered, just drunk out of their minds. That's not a good thing, but they were. And he wanted to brag a little. And he's like, bring in my queen. I want everybody to see how beautiful she is. Bring her in. So he commanded her to be brought in and show her beauty. Now, I've heard different stories on this. I'm sure you have too. Carol is covering her mouth and giggling for the sake of YouTube. But what did you hear, Carol?
Oh, well, it was rather risque. He wanted her to unrobe.
That's what I heard.
In front of his bigwig friends.
Exactly. All of his noble friends, all men, and he wanted to show her beauty, and I have heard, just show them all you got. But there's another story that says he wanted her simply to unveil herself. That was totally against custom. You did not unveil and show your face if you were a woman in the presence of all these men, and she refused. Now, you got to feel for her just a little bit. She was trying to obey her cultural dictates, not to break her religious laws. He got really ticked off, and you can imagine that his pride's at stake here, just a little bit. Because here he is, I'm the king, show us your beauty. She says, no. And all his friends are looking at him, look like, what's he going to do? What's he going to do? And so he has but for the sake of his pride, he says, cast her out. She's not queen anymore. Get rid of her. Because she had totally slammed his pride in front of his friends. So he sent out the edict, I want a new queen. Bring me all the beautiful young women who've not been despoiled by man, and let's see who's going to be the queen. And that sets the stage for Esther. this beautiful orphan girl. I cannot imagine what she must have been like, because she found favor with everybody who was around her. She came into the palace, and as they were fixing her up, it says the keeper of the house, that was, I don't know if it was the chamberlain, but the keeper of the house, she found favor with him. And when she was brought before the king, she found favor with him to the point that they said he loved her. I mean, it wasn't just, bring me some beautiful woman for my queen. He loved her. And I think that made a difference in the ending of this story. Any thoughts on this as we're talking about it? Anything? We left out a lot of the story, but this is the high points. So Esther becomes queen. Meanwhile, her cousin Mordecai becomes a high official in the courts of the king. And we'll go on with a little bit more of the story before I get into his descent, which is important. Mordecai actually saved the king's life because he uncovered a plot. Again, this is like a detective show. This is like a murder mystery on TV. It's a great story. He uncovered a mystery that some of the kings, I think these were his chamberlains, they were talking that we're going to kill him. We're going to get rid of the king. Well, Mordecai heard about this, and he went and warned the people in charge, somebody's trying to kill the king. There's going to be an assassination. Warned the king. The king was so grateful that they wrote it in the chronicles, like the diaries of the kingdom. They put a note that Mordecai brought word of this dastardly plot, and he saved the king. But nothing really much was done to him. He wasn't like paraded through the streets at that time. It was forgotten about for a time, for a season. So now you have the stage is set for this wonderful story we're going to talk about. Now let's go back and talk about what is ultimately going to be a lesson in obedience, because this is something most people don't know. I went to the synagogue and actually studied some Jewish classes, was trying to learn to speak Hebrew, and the rabbi was teaching us the importance of the lineage of these people. Now, Mordecai's lineage, and it would be good if I had more space on here. Does anybody remember this name? Kish. He was the father of King Saul. Well, Mordecai came from this lineage. He was from the same lineage as King Saul. That's important. It was a fairly godly lineage. We know Saul went awry, but it was a fairly godly lineage. And then, does anybody remember this dude? Agag. Agag.
Remember the name, but I
Yeah,
can't remember the
an evil king, just for the sake of the dastardly plot. That was an evil king long ago in Israel. Well, the bad guy in this story, which we usually pronounce it as Haman. I think there's a different pronunciation, probably Haman. But these are the two lineages. So you got good guy, you got bad guy. Well, does anybody remember this name? Amalek. And I think I have this on your paper, don't I? Yes.
I know I've heard it.
You've heard that? It's a very biblical name. Amalek was Esau's grandson. You've got this same battle in the book of Esther being reenacted that goes all the way back to Jacob and Esau. Because remember that battle between the brothers, Jacob and Esau? Well, Amalek was Esau's grandson. And he's known, his really first bad act that we know about is when the poor Israelites, children of Israel, were wandering in the wilderness. He brought his people and attacked them. And just did a horrible, I don't know if there was a huge slaughter, but they were unarmed at that time. They weren't prepared for battle. And they came and attacked them in the wilderness. And at that point, let's read what God said. Deuteronomy, and this one I don't have on your page, Deuteronomy 25:19.
Yes, you do.
Do I have it? Yes. But I don't have the actual scripture.
Oh,
We've got the mention of it. Deuteronomy 25:19. Okay. Anybody got that? You can read it for us?
Therefore it shall be, when the Lord thy God has given thee rest from all thy enemies round about in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance to possess it, that thou shalt blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven, thou shalt not forget it.
So what God tell them to do? Get rid, blot out any remembrance of Amalek. Get rid of it. because he did us such a disservice. He said he's an enemy of God. Get rid of him.
So in other words, don't take any spoils from, or don't leave it, kill everybody.
Yeah, and see, God told them this long before King Saul. He told them we're going to have to get rid of Amalek. Well, the time came that King Saul was in power, and he could have gotten rid of Amalek. Do you remember this story? This is when he came up against King Agag, who was a descendant of Amalek. And what did God tell him? Just what Carol said.
Get rid of everything.
Yes. Everything. Like she said, take no spoils. I hate to think about it, but kill everybody. Kill them all. Was what they were told. But remember what King Saul did. Kept some things. And what did he think he was doing? Was he really just trying to disobey?
He was just greedy, I think.
Well, I would say that he was greedy. But he said at one point he thought God wouldn't mind. If he did this, I didn't think he'd mind.
I believe I probably said that at some point.
Me too in my life. Well, God wouldn't care, would he?
Beg forgiveness, not permission, right?
There you go. And this is where that whole scripture comes in, that to obey is better than sacrifice. Because Saul said, well, I thought we could just, spare some of this stuff. But no. So do you see how Saul's disobedience back then caused what happened in the book of Esther? Because if Saul had obeyed God and wiped out the Amalekites, there would have been no Haman. That whole people would have been wiped out. But because Saul disobeyed long before this story took place, then the Jews had to fight for their lives again. I think that's a powerful lesson for us. If we take something away, I've been disobedient before. I'm sure everybody here has been. And my disobedience has caused great heartache a lot of times. Always. Don't you think disobedience always causes heartache on down the line? Obviously, God's a redeemer. He can, turn it back around. All things work together for good, even when we step out of His will. And this turned around for His good, but it still caused heartache. So that's an important lesson to take with us. Now, it's not a story you hear a lot when you read the book of Esther. It's this lineage. It's important. Let's keep going. We already know the setting, and this is where, Carol, you're feeling that this is a prophetic thing right now may be very important. And I want to hear more about your thoughts on that, because do you see the setting? We're in Persia, Shushan, just north of the Persian Gulf. You've been over there, haven't you, Troy? Just north of the Persian Gulf in modern Iran. Iran, as they call it here, Iran. That was the Persian Empire. It was huge back then. They had 127 provinces, and according to the book of Esther, it stretched from India to Ethiopia. It was huge. Any thoughts? Can you share anything you feel, Ulrich?
What's the words? The backlash against Jewish people today,
right,
I think is growing. Of course, Iran and what we know is going on over there.
Right.
I just feel, and Israel itself, none of those surrounding areas want them to even exist.
That's
they say it in their own, they just tell us every day.
That's right. I think you're exactly right. Say that again.
They're out to destroy Israel.
Haven't they always been out to destroy Israel? This whole story is about being out to destroy Israel. Even from Amalek and these people, attacking them in the wilderness. Let's destroy Israel. And God always moved him in a miraculous way, and He's going to again. He is. He really is. But I think right now, just as she said, with what's going on over there with Iran, and there's, but you watched that speech last night with Netanyahu.
Yeah.
See, I want to see that. I missed it.
It's on, somebody posted to YouTube. I'll see if I can find it. Soon.
Yeah, I really, really, really want to see that, because I do admire that man.
It was a great, great speech.
It was.
What I meant
humble. He's an humble man.
It gives you goosebumps when you hear him talk. He doesn't
really.
I've got to see it tonight. I can see. What were you going to say, Susan?
I saw it.
Yeah.
You saw it too? All of this
All
seems so crucial right now, because this story's taking place over there in Iran. I have to say Iran, and I guess it's Iran for us. That's what's taking place again. It's the same thing. So we're going to see how God's going to move this time.
And everybody knows that Iran sort of controls what goes on in Syria also.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's right. So it's all
And
tied
unfortunately,
in
Iraq
together.
as well. They're buying all this stuff in the rest.
That's right. And I would assume that the Persian Empire at this time maybe covered all those areas. It went really far.
They did it. It was, the good bit of it was the Ottoman Empire too, and it was huge prior to World War I.
Yes, it was.
Well, so do we think, and I know this, you probably don't have time for all these questions, but the Amalekites, do we think those are the Persians today, or have they moved their descendancy are they just scattered all throughout
See,
the
I don't
Middle
know.
East?
Does anybody know?
Don't you think they probably scattered all out? Yeah. I believe they are.
I think they're still in existence. We know that.
Yeah.
Because even with the story in the book of Esther, they weren't wiped out there. They could have been, had Saul done what he was supposed to do. Well, anything that hits you on this, let me know. Raise your hand. Let's keep going with this chain of events. Mordecai saved the king's life. And then, what we've got to figure out now, well, he saved the king's life. He's a hero. What happened to sort of make Mordecai's life be in danger? Well, the bad guy, Haman, was the king's prime minister. We'll just give him that title. It was something similar. He was the king's prime minister. He was very, very arrogant, from what we read in the book of Esther. And so he would go riding through the capital city, and there was an edict. He persuaded the king to put out this edict that everybody who saw him was to idolize him, to bow down, and treat him as a god. Well, Mordecai, being the fervent Jew that he was, knew, thou shalt have no other gods before me. He was not about to bow down and worship Haman. So can you imagine what that did to Haman? When he'd ride through town, and here's this Jewish guy, and everybody else is bowing down, but Mordecai just refuses. Well, Haman, again, was ticked off. I got to do something, he said. And he went and talked to his friends. What can I do? What can I do? Well, let's hang him. Let's find a way to hang this man who will not pay me the respect that I'm due. So he literally built a gallows. You read that in the book of Esther? He built a gallows that he was going to hang Mordecai on. And this turns around. This is to show you how God turns everything around. There's a song I want to sing right now, John P. Key, about turning it around. You might know that song I'm talking about. Come on, Rebecca. We'll make Rebecca sing on YouTube. Now that's going to hit me in a minute. How he turns things around for our good. Well, Haman also said, that's a Jew. That's why he won't bow down, because he's a Jew. And he's putting this other God above what we believe. So let's kill all his people. Because if he won't bow down to me, you think his people are going to? Let's kill the Jews. So what did Haman do? He went to the king and he got permission. You know, in a sense, I see the king as sort of this innocent guy just saying, well, here's my prime minister telling me something. I believe him. I put him in power. Sure, you can kill him. So the king issued the royal edict, you can kill all the Jews. And that's when Haman cast the lot. Hence the name of this holiday, Purim. He cast the lot to say, what day do we kill him? Adar 13. Well, that was 11 months later. When he cast the lot, there was going to be a long time before the killing actually took place. A long time to make them suffer and just sit and think we're going to be attacked. Because the Jews were the minority. So it didn't look good for them at all. When you go further into the story, Mordecai found out about this dastardly plot, and he went to Esther. Because even though he had a high position, he knew that if a king was going to listen to anybody, it was that beautiful wife of his that he loved. So he went to Esther, and these are some of my favorite scriptures. In fact, let's turn to the book of Esther. Esther 4:14 is one of my very favorite scriptures. Mordecai went to her and said, step in and intervene. You've got to do it. Does anybody remember why it was dangerous for her to step in and intervene?
She goes before the king without asking.
That's right. Nobody was supposed to enter his presence, and like my mom said, unless they had been called, they had been summoned. You didn't just walk in.
Even your wife, isn't that something?
That is something, isn't it? Even your wife's got to wait. And you know what's interesting? She had not been called into his presence at this time in 30 days. So you can imagine you're Esther, not you, Troy. Imagine that you're Esther and you're sitting there and going, 30 days, is he tired of me? I've not heard from him in 30 days. And now they're asking me to go in there in front of him, and he could kill me. He could order me killed just like that. What was the sign if you entered the king's presence that you wouldn't be killed? Anybody remember? Yes. He would put out his scepter and you knew, I'm safe. He's not going to kill me. But when Mordecai went to Esther, these are famous words. Could somebody read Esther 4:14, please?
For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall there enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed, and who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this?
You've all heard that, for such a time as this. I believe that every one of us here, and I'm assuming we all know the Lord, that there's something on this earth that we're meant to do. Maybe it's one thing, maybe it's multitudes of things that we've been put into the kingdom for such a time as this. And just think in your own life, think of something that you know God has put in your heart to do. For me, I know I was called from my mother's womb to minister in this town. The county as well, but specifically this town. I know I was called into the kingdom for such a time as this. And I think you all probably have some things in your heart that you can think of for your own personal use here. So when Esther realized this is possibly the purpose of my life, to step in and try to intercede for my people, she called a fast for 3 days. She didn't just rush in to the king's chamber. She didn't go in there just automatically. She approached it with prayer and fasting, which I think is another good lesson for us to learn before we rush into anything. So for 3 days, there was what we now call the fast of Esther. And that technically took place near Passover. And some people still celebrate, or not celebrate, but participate in the fast of Esther today. So she called a 3-day fast, and then she entered his presence, but it didn't go just like you think. My thought would be, she went into the chamber, he extended the scepter, she fell to her knees and said, "Save my people, save my people." That's not what happened. What'd she do? Before she begged for him to save her.
She fixed some dinner.
Yeah, fix some dinner. Yeah, I'm going to throw a little party. She invited the king and Haman to a banquet. So she had a little plot going on here. She's thinking. And what's the old thing? A way to a man's heart's through his stomach. Maybe that played in just a little bit. Is this true?
I think that's where that came from.
But she also told them to gather the Jews and tell them to fast.
Yes, she did. That's a good point. It wasn't just her that fasted.
right.
She said gather the people. And I'm glad you brought that up. Gather them all. So she had this prayer power behind her, just girding her up with strength. So she invited the king and Haman to this banquet. So they went to the banquet. They had, I assume, a wonderful time. Sounds like a good time was had by all, as you might read in the Stokes record. As they used to call it, a good time was had by all.
My line by Leslie Gray.
Yeah, I used to write for them. So when you're talking about this banquet, again, it doesn't go just like you think. Because you think, okay, she sort of surprised me there. She didn't ask him right away. They're going to have a banquet. She's going to ask him at the banquet. Well, sure enough, the king looks at her at the end and says, no, what is it you need to ask me? And I'm paraphrasing what he said. Did she ask him then? No. She said, I want to throw you another party tomorrow night. Your mind has to think, now was she just, trying to put this off longer and longer? We don't know. But I believe she thought this through with prayer and fasting. So she said, another banquet tomorrow night. So again, they come to the banquet. And actually, let's back up a minute. Before they had the second banquet, he went home, the king Ahasuerus, Xerxes the first. He went home after the first banquet. He couldn't go to sleep. Now, I would have to chuckle to say I've often wondered, did she put something in his coffee or, his Turkish coffee? What happened? He couldn't go to sleep. He was just up. And you can imagine with insomnia, and finally he just, read me the Chronicles. Come read me the royal diary of things that have happened. So they start, reading to him all this stuff. Well, guess what they get to? Isn't God's timing amazing? They get to the part where Mordecai saved his life. Well, he still has not put this together. That Mordecai and Esther, he's not put all this together. It seems to be just happenstance, but we know God divinely ordained all of this. So he hears, oh yeah, that guy saved me, and I really didn't do anything to honor him. So this is what's humorous. He calls Haman in, and remember that Haman hates Mordecai. He's got the gallows ready. He's going to hang him, he thinks. And the king says, I need to talk to you. He said, if there's a man that you really want to honor, what would you do to honor him? Well, if it was me, I would think, that's me. He's talking about me. Oh, let me think of something good. I'd put him in royal clothes. I'd parade him through the town to the cheers of the people. That's exactly what I would do in the king's carriage. Because Haman's thinking all along, he's going to do that to me. He's talking about me. The king said, that's a great idea. I want you to do that tomorrow to Mordecai. Well, can you imagine? Haman's face must have gone like this. Yeah, he's talking about my mortal enemy. I got to do this for my mortal enemy. So Haman literally had to do that for Mordecai and make Mordecai the hero. But he's still plotting. He's still plotting. It's an awesome story. You like it, don't you, Johanna?
I love it.
Kids, see there, kids like this story. My kids love it. So, now it's time for the second banquet. This is when she actually petitions the king for the lives of her people. She said, I don't know how she said it, we'll paraphrase. Oh, king, there's somebody who's wanting to destroy my people, and they haven't done anything, and it's a cruel plot. Well, the king, he loves this beautiful woman, and I can imagine that he just, who knows, maybe he banged his fist. Who is it? Tell me who it is. She points to Haman, who's right there in the room. And again, you can imagine his shock and awe when all of a sudden she points and says, that's the man. That's the villain. Well, the king is furious. So the king storms out of the room, furious. And while he's gone, do you remember what happened that was misunderstood? Can you just ring a bell? Haman is just desperate. He's thinking, I'm going to get killed. I thought I was going to be Mr. Everything. He starts begging Esther. The king leaves the room. So Haman throws himself down on her couch. She's there, and he's like just clawing at her. Please, please, please. Well, the king walks back in, and the king takes it the wrong way. He thinks Haman is becoming violent, or maybe even just trying to molest or attack my wife, the queen. So right then and there, he didn't even stop to, ask for an explanation. That was going to be the end of Haman. The king said, we're going to do away with him. So, anybody knows what happened to Haman?
On his own gallows.
On his own gallows that he fixed for Mordecai. They took care of him. And not only him. Do you remember who else suffered?
His whole family.
His whole family.
That's right.
He had 10 sons. So his sons were all hanged on those gallows. And when the Jews read the whole book of Esther on Purim. So when they read that and they get to, I think somewhere in here there are the names of Haman's 10 sons, they say them all in one breath. Whoever's reading it tries to, because they want to blot out. They want to blot out even any remembrance of Amalek. So they say it all in one, as fast as they can, all 10 sons of Haman, so that they're just, pish, gone. Which I think is interesting. I can't do it. I tried one time to do it. It was impossible for me. Yeah, I can't pronounce them either. Well, everything looks great. It looks wonderful. Mordecai was promoted. If I'm not mistaken, he was given Haman's old position. We might need to double check that. I don't want to get some facts wrong here. But Haman was done away with. The bad guy's gone. And you would think everything's hunky-dory now. But there's a problem. According to Persian law, if the king passed an edict, he couldn't take it back. He's already said, we're going to kill the Jews on the 13th of Adar. He can't take it back. Because, and let me tell you what's important about that, the importance of our spoken words. I've been doing a lot of studies. We studied that Sunday at our little church group, the power of our words. Because he had spoken that edict, he could not take it back, even though he was king. Couldn't repeal it. So there had to be a different plan. Do you know what it was?
He made another law.
He actually did make another law. You're right. He made another law to say, but we'll let the Jews defend themselves. We'll tell the Jews, okay, there's going to be this battle. So it was almost a planned battle. Going to be this battle, but y'all can rise up and defend yourselves. Normally they could not. Because they were in the land of Persia, they couldn't rise up against the Persians. The minority could not fight against the majority. But he gave them permission to fight back. And this is on the second page of your handout. They actually fought on Adar the 13th, and they won. According to the book of Esther, there were thousands that were killed of the Persians by the Jews. I don't know how many Jews died, if any. I would assume there were casualties, but I don't know. So, we've already talked about the fact they had to fight an extra day in the capital. That's why Purim is celebrated an extra day. Mordecai, because of his high position now, he's sort of in charge of he's public relations, he's sending out the word. So he sent letters to the Jews. He said that he wanted them to celebrate Adar 14th and 15th. And let's actually read that. Still in the book of Esther. Esther chapter 9, 20 and 21. Let's see. Yes. Anybody want to read that one? You got a different version, Mama?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, let me hear that one.
Mordecai recorded these events, and he sent letters to all the Jews throughout the provinces of King Xerxes, near and far, to have them celebrate annually the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar.
And I think it's important for her to read that, because I can tell you that Purim was a feast that the Jews kept. Even though it wasn't back in Leviticus, they did keep it. And it tells you here that he said, we're going to remember this forever, this mighty thing that God did. Do you know that the Jews still have a custom today that if you have had a personal deliverance from something that's just huge. For example, the time we had the deadly parasite, my son was miraculously healed on the altar. Y'all have all seen that on Facebook. Every year, on the anniversary of when my son was healed, October 25th, he was 2 years old, he's now 16. Thank God his life was spared. On October 25th, I celebrate every year the goodness of God. I tell it all over Facebook. I gather my kids around. I put in the video because they were videoing that service when he was healed. You can see it. It's amazing. I put that in and I make my kids watch it, and everybody sits there with tissues, and we never forget, because we vowed. When God did that miracle for us, we vowed we would never forget it. The Jews do this. When there's an individual deliverance in their families or in their personal lives, they celebrate what's called Purim Katan, which means little Purim. So they celebrate a little Purim when they have a personal story. There's one family, I can't think of them, Vega, some family in Europe that had an ancestor who was delivered in 16-something from a horrible death. God delivered him. To this day, they gather on the anniversary of that and have what they call a Purim Katan, a little Purim. I think it's beautiful.
What's that second word you're saying?
Katan, K-A-T-A-N. K-A-T-A-N. I'm assuming that means little, because it means little feast of lots.
Most, yes.
So I wanted you to hear that, so that if there's something in your life, some great deliverance God has wrought for you, maybe it's the day that you truly got saved, maybe it's a day that He healed you from something, a day He performed a marvelous deliverance for you. When that anniversary rolls around every year, you can have yourself a little Purim Katan, a little Purim, that you remember what He did for you. Now we get to the exciting part. How is Purim to be celebrated? And as I've already said, it's the merriest holiday on the Jewish calendar. Adar the 13th became known as the Fast of Esther, which is today, but again, few keep it today. The major traditions for Purim today are found in Esther 9:22. Esther 9:22. As the days wherein the Jews rested from their enemies, and the month which was turned unto them from sorrow to joy, and from mourning into a good day, that they should make them days of feasting and joy, and of sending portions one to another, and gifts to the poor. So I have outlined on your handout the different things they did. Now, first of all, there are no restrictions on working. It's not like Passover, or the Day of Atonement, these very, very holy days that you don't work. If you're a Jew, you don't work. Not true for Purim. You can still go to work, but when you come home that night, you're going to have a party. They read the whole book of Esther. It's called the Megillah, because the Megillah means scroll. So the book of Esther, they have on a scroll, and they read the whole thing. And it's long. That's good. You might think, well, poor Johanna, bless her heart. Troy and Renee, every Purim, they're going to read the whole book of Esther. Well, it make it exciting because kids would arguably get bored through a whole long book of the Bible. Adults would too, not just kids.
Absolutely.
So does anybody know how they make it more exciting?
Act it out.
Yeah.
Yes, and let's just say you got 100 people in the synagogue and you can't necessarily get up and act it out. Well, here's the one person up there and they're reading it. Every time they say the name of Haman, we did it one time, remember? Every time they say the name of Haman, they have noisemakers. Some people actually write Haman's name on the bottom of their shoe, and then they come on in, and they write it on the bottom of their shoe, and whenever you say the name of Haman, and he's in this book a lot, they start stomping on the floor. Yeah, I'd love to do this. We ought to read a few chapters for anybody that can come back Thursday night and actually do this. Well, we are in a library, but we'll get permission. And noisemakers. They would make, and I may get my kids to make some noisemakers, because my kids will all be here Thursday night. And just, boo. They boo and do all kinds of stuff. And there are other traditions that when Esther's name is mentioned, do y'all remember what we did when Esther's name was mentioned?
Well, you make them laugh.
Everybody sighed. Remember when they say Esther? And there was something you do for Mordecai. I got to look this up before Thursday. So I think maybe you do clap for Mordecai. Something good for Mordecai. But for Esther, it was. Well, you can imagine. See, she's laughing already. You can imagine that if you're doing that, even kids are going to perk up because they're listening. And every time you say Haman, they start shaking stuff. So it is a great entertainment. But it's getting across the lesson to the kids of good versus evil, and that God always triumphs over the enemy. Great lesson for kids and for adults. So, they read the book of Esther. They take a collection for the poor. And if y'all can't come Thursday night, it's perfectly okay. This is a kind of no pressure thing. If you can come on. If you can't, no big deal. Some other people who couldn't come tonight are coming Thursday night. So I want to be prepared to read a few chapters. Make some noisemakers. Bring a noisemaker if you're coming. And also, I want to take a collection. And if you would, pray about what charity or what good thing this could be used for. And preferably, I'd like to keep it close to home. So pray about that. If anybody feels anything, send me a Facebook message. Let's just ask God, where do you want money to go? Another thing they do is they send food delicacies to their relatives and friends. So, let's say that it's Purim and Rebecca's my friend and my neighbor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a big plate. And there was a minimum of 2 delicacies on that plate. You wouldn't just put like 1 cupcake and take it over. You would put at least 2 different things on that plate, but they love to fill it full. And the kids get into this. Kids might decorate the plate and put little flowers on it and stuff. And then you take it to your neighbors, and then your neighbors are bringing it to you. So it's a festive time. And they always made sure that they also took it to the poor. Somebody who maybe couldn't afford to give you a plate of delicacies, you take one to them. So that's something to keep in mind, maybe something you want to think on privately, somebody you know of, you want to do something for. It's a wonderful time to do it. It's always a good time to help the needy. I even thought, and let's think on this for a day or so, I even thought it would be cool if we could just bring like one thing. I'm not saying we take a whole plate and make a bunch of delicacies, but say Rebecca goes and buys a bag of chocolate chip cookies, and Troy goes and buys Hershey Kisses. Nothing that takes a lot of time, unless you want to bake something. I'm okay with that. And just everybody bring one thing, and then we could just have delicacies to take home with us in honor and memory of what God did. That's a thought. So think on that. We'll make these plans on Facebook. Now, when they feast, here's the cool thing. Purim starts tomorrow night. But they don't feast until the end of it. So they feast on this calendar. It would be just about when we come together. Near the end on Thursday is when they do their feast. And they actually have This is pronounced Hamantaschen, I think. They're little triangular pastries that are filled with poppy seed or prune fill. I don't know about prune.
That's what I was laughing at.
Carol made a face on that one.
I'll bring some fruit.
Hamantaschen. And you would think that comes from the word Haman, but to my knowledge it doesn't. In Hebrew, the word ha means the, and the middle part of it, man, means poppy seed, and the end of it, taschen, means pocket. So it's the poppy seed pockets. Hamantaschen. And they also make kreblach, which is a noodle-like dish where you have little pieces of dough that's stuffed with meat. Maybe you stuff it with chicken or something and you put it in a thick soup. That sounds really good. But don't expect that Thursday night. Unless one of y'all gonna make it. That'd be cool though. All right, and we've already talked about the drinking. It's also a time where they use masquerades and costumes and parades. Why? Why do you think that would be a theme of Purim? Masquerades and costumes. Think creatively. Was Esther's true identity known?
Yes.
She was not known as a Jew. She was queen, but nobody knew she was a Jew at first. Her identity was not known. She was sort of a little bit in a masquerade. So that's one reason they do that. And now, before our time ends here, let's throw out some different ideas as to the symbolism of this. We can look at this and say, wow, this is a really great Bible story. And of course we want to study it because it is a book of the Bible. The book of Esther is important. And we can learn things from it. How is it symbolic for us as Christians? One of the big things that hit me was to show that the enemies of God are defeated. And I want to read a scripture, Zechariah 2:8. That'll be familiar to you once you see it. Zechariah 2:8, once you hear it. And I have King James Version. Mom, you have NIV? Can you read that?
2:8.
2:8.
For this is what the Lord Almighty says. After he has honored me and has sent me against the nations that have plundered you, for whoever touches you touches the apple of his eye.
Don't you love that? That woo, you just want to shout on that one. Whoever touches you as God's people touches the apple of his eye. Now this was of course written to the Jewish people, but we've been grafted in, folks. It's us too now. So whoever touches you touches the apple of his eye. My kids have to memorize a different Bible verse every week, and right now we're doing the famous verse in Isaiah, no weapon that is formed against you. You know the scripture I'm talking about. And every tongue that rises up in judgment, to condemn you, they're going to be judged. Now, we love our enemies, we bless those that curse us, but at the same time, there is a price to pay when you come against God's people. And this story in the book of Esther shows God's miraculous deliverance of his people. Now, I thought this was fascinating. There's a book that was put out in 1997, and I had to put a quote on your paper from this, and I'll read it aloud for the sake of YouTube here. The people who wrote the book, it's called The Feast of the Lord by Kevin Howard and Marvin Rosenthal. Notice the date again, 1997, when Saddam Hussein and all these people were still alive. But look at this prophetic word. The path of anti-Semitism is a well-worn path that always leads to the destruction of its traveler. Even as the fate of Pharaoh, Antiochus Epiphanes, Hitler, Nasser, Khomeini, whose name actually was Haman. Isn't that interesting? Ayatollah Khomeini, his name was Haman in that language. So too will be the fate of Gaddafi, Arafat, Assad, Saddam Hussein, and the host of others who dare to curse Israel and thereby the God of Abraham. I read that and wanted, my cold chills rose up on me. This was prophetic when they wrote it in 97.
And there's only one of them left.
Only one of them left, yes, only one left.
Think about that. All the others, I wish they could have been turned to God and been saved.
Which is what we want.
That's what we want.
We don't, but we do. all God's children.
That's right. I want them all saved. I want them all turned. I wish Saddam Hussein could have turned to the Lord, but he didn't. And unfortunately, you can't come against God's people without having to pay a price. This is fact, according to this Bible that we hold here. But all the rest of them who are left, who are trying to come against Israel now, God's people and his Christian people, I pray they all turn to God. Wouldn't it be great, if all the Muslims turned to God, as in Jesus Christ, as the way, the truth, and the life. Now, another thing, we've already said this, it shows that God always delivers his people. And think of the little ironies all in this. Mordecai's gallows, that was made for Mordecai, turned out that Haman was the one hanged upon those. So many things were turned around in this story. And I have to read one of my favorite scriptures again. We're pulling out some good ones tonight. Y'all gonna be running around the room. I wish. That's the way to take off. Genesis 50:20. Genesis 50:20. And I do think I want to read this in the King James just because there's some kind of beautiful language here. But as for you, now this is Joseph speaking to his brothers and the ones who tried to kill him. But as for you, ye thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good, to bring to pass as it is this day, to save much people alive. Hallelujah is right. You can see it even in this story we've studied tonight. What was meant to kill somebody, what was meant for evil, was turned around for the good of God's people. And you can you not see that in your own lives? I've seen so many things in my life that I know the devil tried to kill me. He tried to kill me many times, but I stood on this word. Even when I was so sick at one point, they didn't know if I'd live or die for 2 or 3 years. I was in a wheelchair. I had to use even a walker at times. I couldn't talk some days. I was so sick. Nobody could figure out what was wrong. And I stood on this verse. On the days that I could talk, I would literally speak to the enemy and say, as for you, you thought evil against me. This is going to turn around for my good. And it did. God healed me miraculously. And now, what does the Bible say when it talks about a person shall not die, but live to do what?
Declare the Lord.
To declare the works, the glory of the Lord. That's why we want to see miraculous deliverance. Not so we can brag about how great it was, but how we're going to show His glory. It's His glory that came to pass with this story of Queen Esther. All owed to Him. And in our private lives as well. Any other thoughts before we leave this behind? Because we've got to clear out of here in 15 to 20 minutes. Anything hit you specifically as we studied this? Any kind of revelation?
Nope, that sure was interesting about that 1997.
That is, I'm gonna see if
I
I
know,
got
I
that
have
book
to
for
get that
Kindle.
book too.
Great book. I was going to say somebody could borrow mine, but I'm getting ready to use it to study, so I can't loan it out. I brought it with me tonight. It's a great book. Now, to close out tonight, and again, feel free to share anything you feel here. I do want to close out with a prayer session too, and if you need to go, I know it's getting late, that's fine, but whoever can stay, we'll join together in a prayer circle and pray a little while. In Esther 8:17, you can turn to this or you don't have to, whatever you choose. Esther 8:17. This is going to solidify what good things happen when what the devil meant for evil is turned around for God's good. Esther 8:17. And I tell you what, let me hear the NIV again, see how that's different.
In every province and in every city, wherever the edict of the king went, there was joy and gladness among the Jews, with feasting and celebrating. And many people of other nationalities became Jews, because fear of the Jews had seized them.
Look at that. Look at it. Many people of the land, or as her version said, different nationalities, became Jews. And when we're talking about fear, we're not necessarily talking about when we're scared to death of them. It was probably more like a holy awe. Their God is God. We're going to serve that God. We're down to 5 minutes on the
Yeah.
video. That's good. That's perfect timing. So the interesting thing here is, through God's miraculous deliverance, people turned to the one true God. Now that's true for us today. Because whenever I'm going to go talk about how God healed my son of the deadly parasite, how he healed me, I want to give glory to God, and I want somebody to think, oh, that's the God I want to serve. That's the God. That's the real God. And think of that in your own lives. The testimonies. What does the word gospel mean?
Good news.
The good news. The good news of Jesus Christ. The good news of Jesus Christ and Him crucified, and our personal testimonies of what He has done for us. I cannot tell it all. And that brings people in to hear more about Him. Any other thoughts on this before we lose our video? I want us to end up with the prayer time, and Troy, it's fine if you want to cut it off now, it's fine. I want to play a